Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching by JTS Rabbinical student Claire Davidson Bruder.
I'm sorry for this silly little title page, but I've been told I must include it. Before we take a look at our sources, no spoilers, I have a question for all of you. This morning, I talked in my Torah about our 613 mitzvot. And notably, one of those mitzvot is not be a good person. Rather, it's guideposts that we believe help us to be good people. I remember, as you might have noticed, I am 25 years old, which means that even though I'm living a very different 25th year than many, many other people in their 20s, I still have some of the hallmarks of my age. And one of those hallmarks has always been a little bit of spiritual envy and fear around the concept of death. I've always felt that Christianity gives you such a clear-cut path. Be good and go to heaven, be bad and go to hell. And I went through a period in my life where I was deeply envious of that idea of such certainty. And so before we dive into these sources today, I want to actually ask you all a question, which is, why be good? What is the point of being good? I imagine that everyone in this room strives to be good, and my question is, why? Why is it the right thing to do? I was going to actually invite people to just turn and speak to their neighbor for 30 seconds so that everyone can get a word in. Go. All right, folks. Why be good? Does anyone have a thought? Anybody? Immanuel Kant and Socrates. Okay.
Socrates says to be good for goodness' sake. Immanuel Kant would say, broadly, the other duty to their fellow man, to members of society.
Yeah. Socrates says be good for goodness' sake. Immanuel Kant says that we all have a duty to our fellow man. I've thrown in at the... Oh, yes. I like that idea. We believe that God is good, and so we seek to imitate God. We strive to be like God. And we're partners with God in goodness and sometimes in cruelty. So this first source that I've added in here, this quote from Proverbs, Al timna tov, do not withhold good from one who deserves it when you have the power to do it. I threw this in because here we have the Tanakh telling us to be good. It's an easy answer to my question of why be good. This next source that I wanted to look at offers another reason to be good from Rabbi Shai Held. I won't read the whole thing because I know we don't have a ton of time, but what Rabbi Shai Held teaches in this is that one reason to be good is because perhaps it is a prerequisite to asking for goodness from God. He writes, the only people who may truly pray for God's chesed are those who are themselves known for chesed. Only someone who embodies generosity has the right to ask the same from God. It's interesting, it kind of frames God's goodness to us in the realm of the human. What we put out into the world, we get back from the world. The compassion we show other people can be shown to us. Some other people might even refer to that as karma. That's certainly a concept that exists pretty universally. While I love Rabbi Held's writing, I have to admit that I do struggle a little bit with this text. I think that I find it intellectually interesting and in some ways a convincing argument. But personally, I really struggle to wrap my head around the idea that there's a prerequisite to asking God for anything. Some people certainly will look at me as a little bit of a pacifist hippie, a little bit of a naive youth. But I struggle with it because I truly believe that everyone deserves goodness and compassion from Hashem, despite our deeds. And so this is a piece that I struggle with a little bit for that reason. Deborah? Yeah, you might want to build up a little credit. There's this idea in education that I was taught about working with students to build up goodwill, kind of making deposits into the bank of that relationship before you have to withdraw from it, before you have to tell a student they're doing something wrong, revoke a privilege, call a parent. There's this idea of building up deposits in the world. So we've gotten a few different explanations about why to be good. I think that almost any explanation for why to be good is compelling. But that begs the question, then why is it so hard? One of the things that I think about when I think about how difficult it can be to be good is myself when I was a child. When I was little, whenever I got in trouble, I never had to be sent to timeout because I would run to my room and cry because I felt so deeply guilty for hurting somebody else. And yet, it's hard to stop, especially for kids. We see the kid who hits their sister despite the fact that they love their sister more than anything. And it's the same in adulthood. As much as we want to believe that we all in this room possess full control of ourselves, the reality is that we don't. And we all slip up sometimes. Can I invite someone to read this next text from Masechet Brachot? In English is totally acceptable. Any volunteer readers? Or maybe I should read it because of the live stream. I'm sorry, I'm a little sick of listening to my own voice after the past 24 hours. The sages taught in a Baraita, a person has 2 kidneys. One advises him to do good, and one advises him to do evil. And it stands to reason that the one advising him to do good is to his right, and the one that advises him to do evil is to his left. As it is written, a wise man's understanding is at his right hand, but a fool's understanding is at his left. I'm seeing some reactions. Do you have any thoughts on this text? What? I was really intrigued to find this story, this little Baraita in the Gemara, because when I was growing up, I always, heard the idea of an angel on one shoulder and the devil on another, or the idea of wolves coming from Native American culture, of a good wolf and a bad wolf trying to draw you to do things. And what I love about this Baraita is that it's so universal. We find it in so many different cultures. All of these cultures understand just how challenging it is to be good. The scale is not quite balanced because there's a little more strength in the good. In the right, which is the good. And the stronger hand is the good hand, yeah. This next text that I wanted to share is actually the text that inspired me to start putting this source sheet together. Has anyone here seen the TV show The Good Place? All right, so I'll give a quick rundown for those who haven't. The Good Place, it is a wonderful, wonderful sitcom with a deeply philosophical message. It tells the story of a universe in which after death there is a good place and a bad place. And every action you do on Earth is assigned a negative or a positive point value. And based on your point value, after you die, you go to the bad place or to the good place. And that, I think, is really reflective of actually what I mentioned in the beginning of sometimes wishing we had a simple system to understand goodness and the afterlife. So, in an episode of this show, they have a breakthrough about why nobody is getting positive points anymore. In 1534, Douglas Wingar of Hawkhurst, England, gave his grandmother roses for her birthday. He picked them himself, walked them over to her. She was happy, boom, 145 points. In 2009, Doug Ewing of Skaggsville, Maryland, also gave his grandmother a dozen roses, but he lost 4 points. Why? Because he ordered roses using a cell phone that was made in a sweatshop. The flowers were grown with toxic pesticides. They were picked by exploited migrant workers. They were delivered from 1,000 miles away, which created a massive carbon footprint, and his money went to a billionaire racist CEO who sends his female employees pictures of his genitals. Every day, the world gets a little more complicated.
What was the smile on his grandmother's face?
And being a good person gets a little harder. One of the things that they don't always tell you about becoming a rabbinical student is just how many transitions it creates in your life. And specifically, the rhythm of one's life shifts to center not only around the Jewish holidays, but around our work for the Jewish holidays. And over the past 2 years, I have found that I have struggled, and many of my classmates have struggled, to truly spiritually prepare for the Yamim Noraim, for the days of awe. And so the reason I wanted to bring these texts is not because I have a magical answer, why be good, how to be good, and what being good looks like, which is on the next page, but rather because over the past few years, I have learned that the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, the 10 days of Teshuvah, are actually not enough for most of us to be able to actually take stock of our lives and give Teshuvah the thought that it deserves. We all lead busy lives, whether or not we find ourselves working a pulpit on the high holidays. And so what I'm really hoping to encourage with some of these texts is some thought in each of you, the same way it's roiling around in my head, about what being good means to you and how to do it. Because we don't actually need to wait until Yom Kippur with the gates closing to start our teshuvah. Rather, it should be as complete as possible by then, although of course it will never be perfectly completed. I'm going to skip the Mishnah Torah because we don't quite have time for it, and also I'm not convinced that it's as interesting for this conversation as some of the other texts. But I want to conclude with a quote from Abraham Joshua Heschel from an essay he wrote, The Meaning of This Hour. It's, I think, a somewhat lesser-known essay of his. He answers the question, how good do we need to be? And he writes, the apostles of force have shown that they are great in evil. Let us reveal that we can be as great in goodness. We will survive if we shall be as fine and sacrificial in our homes and offices, in our Congress and clubs as our soldiers are on the fields of battle. Thinking about this quote from Heschel moves me very, very deeply. In the midst, what was it like in the midst of World War II to write this call to action that we must all be as good as the fascists, the Nazis, were bad? This is something, since I read this for the first time, that I have been hoping to embody in this next year for all of us, and I don't know how to do it. I find that what happened in Nazi Germany and Europe, and what has happened to the Jewish people for so many thousands of years is so unimaginably awful. I can't find a way to imagine an equivalent goodness. But I want to invite you to join me in an effort to try to find that much goodness in ourselves and in the world.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.